Vidura College, Grade 4. English, Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift. Hello dear children, what are we going to learn today? Today we are going to learn chapter number 1 from page number 1 to 9. How Gulliver came to Lilliput, what happened to him in Lilliput, and from this session we are going to do loud reading. A Journey to Lilliput, chapter number 1. How I came to Lilliput. My father had some land in the north of England, but it was not very much, and I was the youngest of 5 brothers. I left school when I was 17 years old, because my father could not pay for me after that. I then went on to the ship Antelope, which was sailing Captain Pritchard for the South Seas. Let me explain you the content briefly. Gulliver was the youngest of 5 brothers, and he left the school when he was 17 years old, because his father could not pay for him after that. His father had some land in north of England. It was not very much. So he left the school when he was 17 years old, and he went to the ship called Antelope as a worker, and it was sailing under the Captain Pritchard. We set out from Bristol in May 1700, and at first we had an easy time. I will not write down everything that happened to us in those seas. It is enough to say that on our way to the East Indies, a great wind carried us the wrong way, so that we came to the north of Demon's Land. One day on their way to East Indies, a great wind carried them to a wrong way, so that they came to the north of Van Diemen's Land. 12 of our men had died from the hard work and bad food, and of the rest none was very strong. One morning when there was heavy rain, so that we could not see well, one of the men saw a rock very close to the ship. The wind was so strong that we were driven, and a great hole was made in the bottom of the ship. As he said, 12 of their men had died from the hard work and bad food, and the rest none was very strong. One morning a heavy rain and a great wind caught them, so that they dragged on a rock and sank in the sea. 6 of us got a boat into the sea, but we were not strong enough, and the wind soon turned it over. I do not know what happened to the others, but I believe that they must all have been lost. I myself was carried by the wind and water. I don't know I went how far. As the ship cracked on a rock, 6 of them got a boat into the sea, but the wind soon turned it over, and Gulliver was carried to an unknown place by the wind and water. At last I was sure that I was going to die, but I put my feet down and found that I could stand. By this time the wind was much less. I walked more than a kilometer before I got to dry land. It was after 7 at night then. I went on about half a kilometer, but I could not see any houses or people, or perhaps I was so tired that I did not see them. Gulliver was carried to an unknown place by the wind and water, and on that land he walked about half a kilometer, but he could not see any houses or people. Then I lay down on the grass, which was very short and soft, and fell into the deepest sleep that I ever had in my life. I must have slept for about 9 hours. When I awoke, it was just daylight. I was lying on my back. I tried to get up from the ground, could not move. He walked about half a kilometer. Now he was very tired, so he fell into a deep sleep, and he slept for about 9 hours. When he awoke, and he tried to get up from the ground, but not move. We'll see what happened to him. Then I found that my arms and feet were held down to the ground with strings. My hair, which was long, was held down in the same way. Thousands of strings had been passed across my body, so that I could not move. I could only lie there on my back, up at the sky. He could not move because his arms and feet were held down to the ground with thousands of strings. Not only his arms and feet, his long hair also held down in the same way, so that he could not move. The sun grew hot and the light hurt my eyes. I heard noise all around me, but I could see nothing. In a little time I felt something alive moving on my foot. Then it came over my body and up to my face. Turning my eyes down as much as I saw a man. He was less than 15 centimeters high. By his dress he seemed to be a soldier. Then 40 more little men like him followed. As he could not move, he could not see anything, but he heard noise all around him. And in a little time he felt something moving on his body, and it came up to his face. Then he saw a man. He was less than 15 centimeters height. By his dress he seemed to be a soldier. I was so much surprised that I gave a great cry. They all ran back in great fear, and, as I was told later, some of them were hurt in jumping down from my side onto the ground. They soon came back, and one, braver than the rest, came so far that he hit my face. By seeing these little creatures, he gave a great cry. So all these little creatures ran back in great fear, and some were hurt in jumping down from his body to the ground. He threw up his hands and raised his eyes and cried out in a very clear voice, "Hekina, Digul," and the others answered, "Hekina, Digul, Hekina," but I did not then know what they meant. One man who was braver than came up to his face and cried out in a very clear voice, "Hekina, Digul," and the others answered, "Hekina, Digul, Hekina." Gulliver could not understand what he said. After pulling very hard, I got one arm up from the ground. I also raised my head. This gave me great pain, for many of the hairs were pulled out. I put out my hand to catch some of the little men, but they ran away before I could catch them. The noise and felt a pricking in my hand like that of 1,000 needles, and I found that they were shooting at me. After trying so many times, he got one arm up from the ground, and he put his hand to catch some of the little men. But he could. Then he felt a pricking in his hand. They have started to shoot at him with thousands of needles. Many of the little arrows went into my clothes and did not hurt me, but others were shot up into the air and came down on my face. They caused me great pain, and I was afraid for my eyes. I put my hand over my face. Arrows that went into his clothes didn't hurt him, but some arrows were shot up into the air, and that came down onto his face. That caused him a great pain. After this, I thought that the wisest thing to do was to lie quiet till night. I thought that then I could quickly set free the rest of my body. I thought that I had no cause to be afraid of the people, if they were no larger than those that I had seen. What happened? He thought of lie quiet till night, and he thought that he had no reason to be afraid of these people, because they were not larger than those who he had seen. But things did not happen in this way. When the people saw that I was quiet, they did not shoot at me anymore. But by the noise, I knew that their numbers had become greater. Soon I heard a sound near my ear. Turning my head a little, I saw they were building a wooden table. As he was quiet, they didn't shoot him anymore, but by the noise he knew that their numbers had become greater. Then, turning his head a little, he saw some men were building a wooden table, large enough for 4 of the little people to stand upon, and about 45 centimeters high. When the table was ready, 4 of the little people got up on it. One of them was older and rather larger than the other 3. He had a beautiful coat held up from the ground by a little boy who stood behind him. He called out, "Langro, Dihal Sam." When the table was ready, 4 little people got up on it. One was older and rather larger than others, and had to speak. At once 40 of the people came and cut the strings which held the other side of my head, so that I could turn it and see the people on the table better. Then the man with the long coat began to speak. He spoke very well, moving his hands this way and that, as to show his meaning. Now, my dear children, they cut some strings which held on side of his head, so that he could turn his head. And the man spoke very well, moving his hand this way and that, so as to show his meaning. He spoke for a long time. Of course, I did not know the words, but from his hands and from his voice, I thought that he was telling me that they would not hurt me if I did as I was ordered, but that they would kill me if I tried to get free. Now, Gulliver didn't understand anything from his words, but from his hands and voice, he understood that they would not hurt him if he did as he was ordered, but that they would kill him if he tried to get free. I raised my hand and turned up my eyes to the sky to show that I knew what he meant and that I would remain quiet. I also put my hand to my mouth, showing that I wanted food. I had had nothing to eat for some hours before I left the ship. Now Gulliver was very hungry, so he put his hand into his mouth to show them that he wanted food. He seemed to know what I wanted. He gave some orders, and at once 100 men climbed up onto my body and marched up to my mouth, carrying food. These things had been sent there by the king when he first heard about me. I did not know what the food was. There were things not larger than mice. I thought perhaps they were cows cooked whole. At once 100 men climbed up on his body carrying food, and they were sent by the king. Perhaps they were cows cooked whole. There were also hens no bigger than a bean. I ate the loaves of bread 2 or 3 at a time. As I ate, there were cries of surprise from the people because I could eat so quickly and so much. After I had eaten, I showed them that I wanted to drink. Great many men came carrying a great pot of milk which they poured into my mouth. Not only cows, there were also hens not bigger than a bean. After he had eaten, he showed them that he wanted to drink. I called for another, and they gave it to me. But when I called for a third, they showed me that they had no more. I had drunk all the milk in the country. So pleased were they at the sight of my eating and drinking, that they danced upon my body and my crying out, "Hekina Deagle." Then, my dear children, he asked for another pot of milk and for a third, but there were no more. He had drunk all the milk in the country. After I had eaten, there came to me a very great person bringing a letter from the king. He was followed by many servants dressed in very fine clothes. He walked up to my face and held out his letter close to my eyes. Then he spoke for some time. several times pointed to the northwest. After that, a person came with a letter from the king. As I learned later, he was pointing to their city, which was about a kilometer away. He seemed to be saying that the king had ordered that I must be carried to the city. I answered in a few words, and I showed with my hand that I wanted to be set free. He knew what I meant, but he moved his head as if saying, "No, you must be carried." The letter was from the king, that Gulliver must be carried to the city. And Gulliver showed with his hand that he wanted to be set free. They didn't allow him to be free. But he showed me that they would give me food and drink and that no one would hurt me. Seeing the great number of them and remembering the pain of the shooting, I said that they might do what they wished. The great man then went away, very pleased with himself. Then they promised him that they would give him food and drink, but he must be carried. Soon after that I heard a great noise of the people, and there were cries of "Peplum Zealand." Then a lot of people came on one side of me and cut all the strings on that side, so that I could now turn onto the other side. I was glad to do that. They put on my face some oil which had a nice smell and took away all the pain of the shots. This and the food that I had eaten made me sleepy. I slept for about 9 hours. I learned later that they had mixed a sleeping powder with my food. As soon as the king had heard of my coming, he had ordered his men to bring me to the city. He had told a great cart to carry me. These little people have mixed some sleeping powder with Gulliver's food, so that it made him sleepy. And the king had ordered his men to make a cart to carry him. They brought the great cart just behind my back. Then they had to raise me and put me on it. 900 men worked for 3 hours, and at last they got me into place on the cart. They did it while I was lying in a deep sleep, because 1,500 of the king's largest horses were to pull me to the city. Now they carried Gulliver using the cart, and there were 1,500 of the king's largest horses to pull the cart. After 4 hours we began our journey. We made a long march. Then we rested at night with 500 men on each side of me, ready to shoot me if I tried to move. Next day at daylight we went on, and at noon we were about 150 meters from me. The king came out to meet me. He came near and looked at me, but his wise men did not think it was safe for him to climb up on me. Now, my dear children, it took nearly 2 days for them to go to the city. Then the king came to meet him. We'll see what the king did. At the place where the cart stopped, there was an old church. It was the largest building in the whole country. It had now been made ready for me to use as my house. The great door on the north was more than a meter high and nearly a meter wide. I have arranged a house for Gulliver. That was an old church which was the largest building in the whole country. So I could go into it by getting down on my hands. One of my feet was set in a great ring on the end of many strong strings, so that I could not get away, but could only walk about a meter away from the outside of my door. They provided him with a house, but they set a great ring on one of his feet, so that he could not get away. But he could only walk about a meter away from the outside of his door.
My dear children, this is a small summary on the lesson that we did so far. Gulliver left the school when he was 17 years old. Then he went to a ship called Antelope, which was sailing under Captain Pritchard. One day on their way to East Indies, wind caught them. Ship cracked on a rock and sank in the sea. But Gulliver was carried to an unknown place by the wind and water. He walked more than a half a kilometer, but he could not see any houses or people.
He got very tired and fell into a deep sleep on that night. When he woke up, he was unable to move. Then he found that his arms and feet were held down to the ground with strings. Thousands of strings had been passed across his body so that he could not move. So he heard noises around him. He could not see anything. A man less than 15 centimeters high, who was dressed like a soldier, came over his body. He got surprised and gave a great cry. And one little brave man came and shouted, "Hekina Deagle," and the others replied, "Hekina Deagle Hekina." But he did not understand anything. In his attempt to get free from strings, he hurt a lot, so he thought that thing to do was lie quiet till night. Quite later, he saw some men were building a wooden table, large enough for 4 little people to stand upon. And when the table was ready, 4 of the little people got up into it, and one man started to speak, moving his hands. He did not know, but from his hands and voice, he understood what he meant. Gulliver put his hands to his mouth, showing that he wanted food. By king's order, they brought food for him. Then he asked something to drink. He drank 2 pots of milk, and when he asked for a third, they showed that he had drunk all the milk in the country. After eating, a person came with a letter from the king ordering that he must be carried to the city. The food he had eaten made him sleepy. They had mixed sleeping powder with the food, and Gulliver was carried to the city by a cart to meet the king. Finally, they have arranged an old church, which was the largest building in the whole country, for him to use as his house. One of his feet was set in a great ring on the end of many strong strings, so that he could only walk about a meter away from his. My dear children, now you have finished up to page number 10 in Gulliver's Travels book. Hope you have enjoyed the story. Have an awesome day.